We open into the first letter of Peter to his friends in the church. Our chapter is number 3 and verses 18 to 22. Do listen for the mention of Jesus' prison ministry. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. Now, Jesus' prison ministry was out of this world. But first, let's talk about prison life in Jesus' time. Prison was a bad place to be. The prisons were usually in bad locations with bad food and bad people. The locations were bad because they were usually an afterthought. The prisons were often located in the guardhouse of the governor or the king. There was no guarantee they would have proper light or ventilation. The food could be nothing more than bread and water. Prisons usually had their share of bad people. Prisoners were often kept in one room together. Sometimes the worst criminals would terrorize everyone else in the holding tank. The one ray of light for a prisoner would come from their family. If you had family nearby, they could bring you food and a change of clothes. The fact that you had some family visitors might also cause the guards to be a little nicer to you. We need to remember Jesus spent the last night of his life in a place like this. Jesus was the kind of person that no prison could contain for very long. Granted, he went from the jail of Pontius Pilate to the cross. But Jesus' next prison was the tomb, which could not hold him for more than 3 days. When we look at Jesus' prison ministry, we see Jesus open the doors of prison in 2 different worlds. Jesus opens the door of death in this world. In 1 Peter 3:19, Jesus opens the door of the prison in the underworld. Jesus' prison ministry literally was out of this world. Like Jesus, a lot of Christians went into prison in this world. We see all 12 disciples ended up in jail at some point in their life. Because they followed Jesus' teachings and his law of love, they received the same kind of rejection that Jesus did. The disciples went in 12 different directions to 12 different lands to proclaim Christ. Of the 12 disciples, only John, the brother of no, I lost my little spot there. Only John, the brother of James the fisherman, died of old age. Along with the disciples, the original 12, other early Christians went to jail. Christians such as Stephen, Paul the Apostle, Barnabas, Timothy, Philemon, and St. Valentine. Christianity can't forget how good we have it. Just as our ancestors say to us, you have it so easy. We used to walk uphill to school 5 miles in a blizzard both ways. Those early Christians could say, we used to go to church, get arrested, go to jail, suffer police brutality, and then sometimes die. It almost sounds like the warning on a pharmaceutical label, the path of a Christian martyr. This may cause side effects, suffering, and sometimes death. But they were not criminals. They were following Jesus' example. We remember that he was jailed on that Holy Thursday. Jesus went to trial that night, spent just a few hours in jail, then went to trial before Pontius Pilate. He spent 3 hours on the cross before he died. Jesus then spent the 3 days in the tomb, so to speak. But during those 3 days, he was not just lying around. According to verse 19, Jesus went down to the underworld. This would be the worst kind of prison to visit. This would be the land of death itself, and it would not be the place of eternal reward and happiness. This would either be hell itself, or it would be the eternal waiting room called Sheol. According to early Christian tradition, Jesus went there to preach to the captives and offer them a second chance. Jesus was also there to liberate the heroes of the Old Testament. Jesus went down to bring back heroes like Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jesus went there to transition these spiritual leaders into the light and peace of God's eternal heaven. Jesus was setting a lot of Christian traditions and precedents at this time. If we compare this chapter of 1 Peter with the Apostles' Creed, we see one major point after another. We hear the words suffered, crucified, dead, and buried. We hear the words descended to the death, rose again, and sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. The path Jesus followed set a lot of prisoners free. He was the first Christian prison minister. After Jesus set the prisoners free in this world and the underworld, he went to take his place in the eternal world. When we hear the words that he is seated at the right hand of God, we picture the three thrones of grace. Of course, the throne in the middle is reserved for God. This makes sense because God is supposed to be the center of our universe, the center of our lives. God deserves to sit in the middle. The right-hand chair is the second seat of honor. Of course, Jesus earned the right to sit on this throne. And then there's the third chair. This one does not appear to be assigned to anyone yet. Who belongs in that third chair? Who sits at the left hand of God? So far, I have not been able to find out. But using my spiritual imagination, I wonder if that chair is often left open. I wonder if that chair is meant to be a chair for the guests. I wonder if every time a new soul is welcomed into God's kingdom, maybe they get to spend a few minutes sitting in chair number 3, because the image of heaven is all about hope. And for the sincere Christian, the hope is to sit down one day and have that talk with God. Yes, Jesus' prison ministry is out of this world. It is meant to take us out of this world and into the next. Amen.